Shipbuilding is as important a skill now as it was 2,000 years ago when we first started exploring the oceans in detail. No matter how many other types of transport we build, there will always be a time and a place for ships. Ships don't last forever though, and when they either sink or get retired from service, they could end up just about anywhere. We'll prove that in this video. The old Soviet cruise liner Lyubov Orlova is unique in our video, as she's the only abandoned ship that we don't know the location of. In fact, we can't even be 100% sure that she's still floating at all. The vessel, named in honor of an old-time Soviet movie star, was once the pride of the fleet of the Marine Expeditions Company. She received her first passengers in 1976 and was still welcoming visitors 30 years later. By 2010, she was still running, but in a poor state of repair. By 2012, she was badly damaged, and the company that owned her was in deeper debt than it could afford to pay. The company went bust, and the ship was sold for scrap. As she was being towed from Canada's Newfoundland to a wrecker's yard in the Dominican Republic in January 2013, though, she snapped her tow rope and drifted off on her own. She was sighted further down the Canadian coast a few weeks after that, and then identified by the Irish Coast Guard on the other side of the North Atlantic Ocean 3 months after that. A rumor that she'd turned up on the coast of California in 2017 proved to be unfounded, and she remains missing. The Pasuta shipwreck doesn't look real. The combination of the broken-down wooden wreck and the utterly unique backdrop makes it look like something that was designed in a video game. We can assure you it's very much real though, and you'll find it on Graham Island in British Columbia, Canada. The dreamy backdrop is provided by the unique scenery and rainforests of the Haida Gwaii archipelago, a largely unspoiled place that very few people have even heard of, let alone visited. The wreck of the Pasuta has been on the beach here since 1928, when the 264-foot-long barge ran aground during a storm while making its way down Talal River. She was already old by that point, having begun life as a steamship before being converted for logging just after the turn of the century. Today, it looks like there's almost nothing left of her when you survey the wreck from a distance. But get closer, and you'll see that the metal portholes are still in place, and at least part of the ship is buried beneath the sand. The parts of the Pasuta above the sand will eventually disappear completely, but hopefully not for another few decades. The Royston shipwrecks are a fascinating collection of old, decaying sea vessels in Courtenay, British Columbia, Canada. All 14 of the ships were brought to Comox Harbor and sunk deliberately to create a breakwater. The breakwater was necessary to make things easier for the local logging industry, which used the waterways for transport, but was often impeded by unpredictable tides. The first of the shipwrecks was brought here during the 1930s, but many more were added as the years passed. Experts tell us that there are 3 windjammers, 3 frigates, a pair of destroyers, a trio of steam tugs, 2 barks, and a harpoon boat in the sunken fleet. The mills that the ships protected closed down long ago, but the breakwater is still standing. They'll never be removed because they enjoy protected status, having been granted it under the British Columbia Heritage Conservation Act. The local government considers the wrecks to be archaeologically important, and who are we to disagree with them? Even with that protection, though, all of these ships are doomed. They'll eventually be broken up and swallowed down by the water. Several of them are on the verge of reaching that point already. The MV Fedra was a big, strong bulk carrier ship that launched in August 1984 from Copenhagen, Denmark. She sailed under the names Tenacity and Marine Ranger before changing hands a third time and being renamed the MV Fedra, after which she sailed under the Liberian flag. She was sailing under that flag when she smashed into Europa Point on the Trip of Gibraltar in 2008 during gale force winds. Fortunately, the full crew of the Fedra was rescued. The ship herself wasn't so lucky. Shortly after the last of the 31 crew members were airlifted to safety, the wrecked vessel broke into 2 pieces. That caused an ecological disaster, as about 150 tons of fuel spilt out into the sea, causing an oil slick in the Bay of Gibraltar. Despite this, she was never abandoned. Both sections of the Phaedra were refloated in February 2009, after which she was towed into the Bay of Gibraltar and docked at HM Naval Base, where she remains today. An investigation published in 2012 revealed that the Phaedra wasn't seaworthy at the time of the disaster. You're going to have to use your imagination a little bit to see this next shipwreck because there isn't very much of it left. This is the wreck of the Amsterdam, stranded on the beach in Hastings, England. You can't see it at all unless the tide is low, and even then, there's not much to look at. We should cut her some slack though. She's more than 260 years old. Unfortunately for her and the Dutch East India Company that owned her, her active service life was very brief. She was returning home from her maiden voyage in 1749 when she ran into storms and high winds in the English Channel. The captain fought against it, but it was no use. The cargo ship ran aground, and that's where she stayed. The captain would later claim that his ship was cursed from the very start. 50 of his crew caught yellow fever on their trip to the East Indies, and he'd survived an attempted mutiny. Since getting stuck on the beach, the Amsterdam has spent most of her time beneath the surface, swallowed up by quicksand. The beach didn't spit her out again until 1969. The MS Cabo Santa Maria was on a religious mission in 1968 when it ran aground in Cape Verde. It seems that not even working for God can keep a ship safe from disaster. The vessel was carrying cargo, including 4 new church bells for the Cathedral Metropolitana Nossa Senhora Aparecida in Brazil, but never made it to its destination. It wasn't even possible to retrieve the bells from the shipwreck because they sank, so the cathedral had to make do without its bells until October 1977. Nobody's quite sure why the vessel ran aground, as conditions were calm in the early hours of September 1st when the accident happened. A tugboat was dispatched to try to drag the Cabo Santa Maria free, but she wouldn't budge. Removing the obtainable cargo from the stricken vessel took the best part of the next year, with the work done by the local community in Boa Vista. The bottom half of the ship has since rotted away to little more than a skeleton, but the upper portions hold firm. It's not the best-looking shipwreck you'll ever see, but that hasn't stopped it from becoming a symbol for the island. The River Thames runs through London, England, and is one of Europe's most famous rivers. There are countless wrecked planes and boats at the bottom of it, and one of the most troublesome of them is the wreck of the SS Richard Montgomery. This World War II shipwreck is still loaded with tons of explosives, and as far as anyone knows, they're still viable. She's an American warship and was on her way to France to join up with a shipping convoy when human error saw the ship collide with a sandbank. She'd been involved in the war for less than a year and was laden with 1,500 tons of explosive munitions bound for the European theater, so she was a significant loss for several reasons. Many people have proposed raising the wreck of the Richard Montgomery over the years, but all have been told that it's best to leave it alone. As such, the area around it has been cordoned off by buoys for 80 years to ensure that no other vessel runs into it and detonates any of its cargo by accident. The Phoenicians were among the world's great early sailors, and we can find proof of that in the National Museum of Underwater Archaeology in Puerto de Mazarón in Spain. There are 2 Phoenician boats in the museum, both of which are around 2,600 years old. When they were first found, they provided archaeologists with invaluable information about how the Phoenicians built their ships and the cargo they carried aboard them. History records that they traded with coastal cities throughout the Mediterranean, making it as far as the Atlantic, England, and even the west coast of Africa. Puerto de Mazarón was probably an important stop for them, as it was close to lead and silver mining facilities. These 2 vessels would be too small to carry much lead or silver, but were probably used to ship cargo to larger ships waiting further offshore. The first of the 2 boats was found in 1988 and is little more than a portion of the hull and a few ribs. The second ship, though, is nearly complete and still had its full cargo of lead ingots when it was found. It also had its anchor aboard, the oldest example of an anchor of its kind ever discovered in the Mediterranean. Next up, it's the SS Mahino. She was a hospital ship during the First World War, but today she's stuck on the coast of Fraser Island in Australia. She's badly rusted and full of holes, but somehow the bulk of her hull is still in one piece. Life as a hospital ship isn't exactly what the designers of the Mahino had in mind when she was built. She was supposed to be a luxury ocean liner, ferrying wealthy customers on sightseeing trips across the Tasman Sea. When the First World War broke out, though, the 5,000-ton vessel was called into active service. She even made it as far as the UK, carrying wounded soldiers from France back to England. After the war, she went back to Australia and returned to her original line of work before she was bought by an Osaka-based shipbreaker in July 1935. However, she never made it to Japan. While being towed there, she was struck by a cyclone which tore her tow line and set her adrift. It was sheer luck that she and the 8 people aboard her ended up beached on Fraser Island rather than becoming lost at sea. Today, the wreck is extremely fragile, and so is off-limits to visitors. Our next story concerns not only one shipwreck, but a whole series of them. The Hawaiian island of Lanai has a 6-mile-long stretch of shore known as Shipwreck Beach that has become the home of no less than a dozen shipwrecks, most notably the enormous hulk of the YOGN-42, a ferro-cement fuel barge used by the U.S. Navy, joined by the Navy Yard oiler YO-21. The area is known for its high winds and strong currents, but not all of the shipwrecks arrived through misfortune. During the 19th century, it became a dumping ground for steamship companies looking to offload their old, unwanted vessels. They'd release them into the tide and allow them to beach themselves, and then they would claim the whole thing was an accident. The YOGN-42 and the YO-21 were both made from concrete, which explains why they've held together so well for so many years. But the rotting carcasses of several timber ships are still clearly visible as you walk along the beach, accompanied by anchors, engines, and boilers that are now coated with thick layers of algae and coral. It's quite a scenic walk. The U-352 is a Type 7C German U-boat, 220 feet long and 20 feet wide. It was built in 1940 in Flensburg as part of the ill-fated German war effort. The U-boat had a fairly uneventful military career until May 1942, when it became the first German U-boat to be sunk by the United States Coast Guard. The vessel was close to the American East Coast during the time, and was sunk by the USCGC Icarus as part of the Battle of the Atlantic. The wreck of the U-352 can be found just south of Cape Hatteras in calm, warm Gulf Stream water, which makes it one of the most popular wreck sites for the area's many divers. The vessel is mostly in one piece and has developed an entire marine ecosystem. The hull of the U-boat is encrusted with algae and has been noted to support sea anemones and a variety of corals. So many amberjacks and red barbier baitfish swim around the wreck that it's sometimes difficult to obtain clear photographs of it. Experts say that the wreck is in a stable condition and might survive for several centuries, barring accidents. Treating a ship the way that the MS Mediterranean Sky has been treated ought to be a crime. In fact, it is a crime in some parts of the world. We're including a few pictures of the ship from its glory days so you can get a feel for how beautiful it once looked. Today, stuck on the coast of Greece's Gulf of Elefsina, it's unrecognizable. This proud old vessel was known as the City of York when it launched as a brand new top-of-the-range ocean liner in 1953, but was renamed in 1982 after it was acquired by new owners. The vessel had lost a little of its sparkle after 3 decades on the ocean, and so it was repurposed as a transport ship. The Mediterranean Sky served its new owners well for 15 years, until the parent company went bankrupt, necessitating the seizure of all its assets. That included the Mediterranean sky. The insolvency company dealing with the bankruptcy of the ship's owners deemed her to be worthless, so she was simply towed to the Gulf of Elefsina and effectively dumped there in 1999. She began to sink in 2002 and capsized in 2003. Shouldn't this count as a deliberate act of pollution? Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and enjoy watching new videos on my channel. Thanks for watching, and see you soon!